Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Idaho is a big state, and it covers a lot of territory. Idaho Matters wants to take you to every corner of the Gem State by visiting all 44 counties, and we need your help to do that. Email us your story ideas at idahomatters@boisestate.edu for our new series we're calling Idaho 44. And be sure to join us each weekday at noon and 8 on Idaho Matters and travel the state with us. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. This is Idaho Matters. Last November, we told you the story of baby Onyx, the newborn who died suddenly in Bonneville County and did not receive an autopsy. Well, that led to an investigation by ProPublica reporter Audrey Dutton, who has been taking a deep dive into Idaho's troubled coroner system. She's uncovered another tragedy, this time in Idaho County, where a woman died without any investigation into her death, and it may have led to another woman's murder. Audrey's joining us now to tell us more about her very latest story. Audrey, nice to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
So, Audrey, let's begin about the latest story you wrote and tell us, who was Betty Strong?
Betty Strong, when we meet her in the story, her name's actually Betty Brock, because she was married to a man who was terminally ill. They lived in Florida. She'd lived there her whole life. She was a mother of 7. She'd had 7 children. She enjoyed singing, art, long bike rides, organizing family photos, researching her ancestry, and was really kind of the unifying force in her family, having events at her house and things like that. And she was researching her ancestry online while caring for her terminally ill husband in 2010, when a man named Clayton Strong befriended her on the internet. This is according to her daughter. And that's kind of how he entered her life. He kind of began offering to do work around the house at her house, and eventually was living in the home until that husband died. And quickly thereafter, he married Betty, and she became Betty Strong.
So, Audrey, let's fast forward. So one day, her husband, Clayton, drove up to a small Idaho hospital with Betty's body in the car. Was there any investigation into her death? Because Clayton was saying, well, she died of Parkinson's disease.
That's right. Yeah. So, basically what happened was Idaho County, super rural. There's this very small hospital in Grangeville. He drives up, it's the middle of winter, and he goes into the emergency room and says, "Hey, I have my wife's dead, and she's out in our SUV." The hospital calls the county coroner, who's out feeding cattle at the time out in Whitebird. And he hightails it out there because coroners have to respond to these kinds of calls. And also law enforcement showed up, and they asked Clayton, like, what happened here? And he described her as having been bedridden for years with Parkinson's, and they didn't go to the doctor, and they only used homeopathic remedies, and she didn't have any other family, is what he said. And the coroner, he's pretty new in the job at that point. He kind of looks to law enforcement. They all say, well, this sounds plausible, and they don't see any signs of injuries or anything on her. So they
Mm-hmm.
decide, yeah, it's got to be Parkinson's. And the coroner signs off on her cremation. That was the extent of the investigation.
Okay, so then she's cremated very quickly. But even though Clayton said she doesn't have any family, she has 7 children, and her children become quite suspicious of their mom's death. Now, Audrey, part of this is that in the story you wrote, Clayton really made sure to keep Betty separate from her children. So they had not heard from their mom in quite a while. They find out she passes away. What did you then learn from her daughter Amy's investigation? Because she decided to start investigating what happened to her mom.
Right. So she found out about the death when Clayton went back to Florida and showed up at the home that they had. And Amy got a call from a neighbor saying, "Hey, did you know the Airstream trailer's back?" They'd been living in the Airstream trailer while traveling across the country, and had kind of settled in this RV park in Idaho County. And that's where Betty died. So Amy calls her brother and says, "Hey, can you go see what's going on? We haven't heard from our mom in more than a year at this point." And they had been progressively kind of cut out of her life, is what they told me. Um, and so Clayton says, "Hey, your mom died. She died in Idaho County in Harpster, and get off my property," is what he told her son, because at that point that home now belonged to him. Um,
Hmm.
and Amy found out about this and she immediately started calling people in Idaho County. She also called the Santa Rosa law enforcement in Florida, trying to figure out what had happened. She This was her, worst nightmare. This is what all of the children had been worrying were going to happen, is they would find out that their mom had died. And so she called Cody Funk, the Idaho County coroner, was one of the first people she talked to, and he's kind of said, this didn't seem suspicious at all. So I didn't have any grounds to do anything really more, so
Hmm.
that's how this happened. And she says, "Well, did you know that there had been a history of reports of abuse, and there were, adult protective services had gone to the house, and he'd been keeping us from talking with her, and she did actually have family." And he said, "Oh, didn't know any of that." And so at that point she tried to get an investigation opened,
Hmm.
and as far as she has been told, and as far as we were able to tell, the investigation just didn't start at that point, because there was, the potential crime scene, the death scene was gone. Um,
Hmm.
her body was gone. And so what more did they have, is kind of the thought there. But she decided to do it on her own, and she got a van and started going across the country to look at the places where they had visited during their, years together. And she also went to Idaho County and kind of confronted the county coroner and the sheriff, and asked them for explanations.
And one of the things in Amy's investigation that she found was that Clayton Strong had gotten remarried. So
Right.
Betty's daughter really tried to warn Clayton's new wife and her family. They're in Texas. So tell us what happens in this case.
Right. So this was one of the big reasons that she wanted to get some more answers, and her goal was to have the death certificate changed from a natural cause to, at least like undetermined, what the manner of death was. She has her beliefs, and we have no way of knowing what actually happened. Um, she's not the only one with these beliefs, by the way,
Hmm.
but yes, she discovered, when she was doing all this research 3 months after her mother's death, Clayton had married a new woman who lived in Texas, and he'd moved down there. And she, her goal was like, "Hey, this is, we have great suspicions about this, and we don't want the same thing to happen to another person." And so she reached out, or it's kind of unclear. People can't really remember if she reached out to Shirley Weatherly's children, or if they reached out to her, but they had the same kind of concerns about the isolation that they were seeing, and some controlling behaviors and things like that. Uh, so Shirley Weatherly in Texas was shot to death in 2021, and Clayton ended up being indicted for her
Okay,
murder.
so he was arrested for her murder. What
He was
happens to him?
actually never arrested because
Oh.
he, yeah, a few days later, he was found in Mexico and was arrested. Or it wasn't a few days later, it was months later that he was found in
Mm-hmm.
Mexico, I think. But yeah, he'd gone to Mexico. There was video of him ditching an AK-47 style rifle in a Walmart parking lot close to the Mexican border. And so, but he was taken in Mexico and put in a jail there on firearms charges, totally separate from this. And they kind of called up the Texas sheriff and said, "Hey, we see that this man is wanted," because he at that
Mm.
point, he was a suspect, and he was supposed to be extradited, but he ended up dying in jail there.
Okay, so you mentioned the Idaho County coroner. You interviewed him. Can you tell us a
Right.
little bit about him? In particular, did he feel prepared to take on the job of coroner? Because he was newer in this position when Betty Strong was when she died.
Right. Yeah. So it's important to know, and we can talk a little bit more about this later about Idaho's coroner system and how it operates. But one of the big things to know is that Idaho has 44 very different counties. A lot of them are pretty rural. There aren't a whole lot of people to do a lot of the jobs there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll have typically coroners who are part-time, or at least they're paid part-time. In Cody Funk's case, the Idaho County coroner, his salary right now is 13,000. So
Mm.
these coroners they have to either be retired and have some sort of retirement income, or they have to have other jobs. In Cody's case, he had another job. I believe he has two actually. And he had experience as an EMT. He had experience responding to scenes where someone's injured or potentially dead as a result of being an EMT. He also worked in a funeral home. So he was in terms of like the world of people who are ready to be a coroner, like he kind of fit the bill. Um, However, he has noted to me that when he started the job, his training was here are two manila folders. This is all we have left of all of the coroner records from the previous coroner. Um, Good luck, basically. He
Mm.
didn't get any formal training. Idaho's law does require some training. There's no enforcement of that. He went and he got training. He got as much as he possibly could. He still isn't sure that it was the right kind of training. And because he never went through like an apprenticeship or anything like that to see how you work a case from start to finish. So he had to learn all of it on the job.
Mm. Okay, one of the things that really stood out to me with your interview with Cody Funk was, him admitting that he did make mistakes in Betty's case, but he really says too that the coroner system in Idaho needs to be overhauled. So, with that, Audrey, can we jump into Idaho's coroner system for a minute and how it works in particular and how it compares to other states?
Yeah, and I think that's really where this story, what I hope people take away from this story is that this isn't just a fluke. I mean, people have been saying for more than 70 years, Idaho's a good place to get away with murder. And people have said that to me during interviews, people who work within this coroner system. And they kind of laugh, but they're also not entirely joking. I mean, I asked Ada County
Mm-hmm.
Coroner Rich Riffle, like, do you think it's possible that murders have gone undetected? And he said, my opinion, yes. Um, and one of the reasons for that potentially is because our coroner system is so patchwork. It's entirely locally funded as far as the operations go. There's no oversight, there's no kind of state coordination beyond just the Coroners Association, which is a group of 44 people. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Other states that I've looked at, I called over to Wyoming and talked with a member of their coroner board, and they have rules that the coroner board essentially issues that coroners are supposed to follow, and it spells out what a death investigation involves, which we don't have any of that in Idaho. There's no like
Hmm.
there's a statute that says these are the deaths that coroners must investigate. There's nothing that says what an investigation has to include. In Wyoming, they have that. Um, and it would include a death scene investigation. It also includes, interestingly, a DNA sample. Um, but other states, Montana, another rural mountainous state, has coroners and medical examiner. And they've got a coroner liaison who works with the medical examiner and helps coordinate things to make sure that there's a little bit more standardization across the state so that you don't have this problem where the extent of your death investigation is going to depend which county you die in, which is kind of the
Mm,
fundamental thing that we're seeing in a lot of these cases, as with baby onyx. Kind of just depends which county you're in. And
yeah.
so Montana found a way to do that. Idaho just doesn't have any of that yet.
So, as you mentioned, Audrey, you talked with several experts in death investigations. Not only what have they said about this case in particular, but really about Idaho's coroner system.
Yeah. So I've talked with many death investigators over the past year. And these are national kind of experts. Like they help write the guidelines. They're involved in kind of looking at what's working, what isn't working. And they said about this case, um, almost all of the coroners or medical legal death investigators also talk to medical examiners, but um, almost all of them said, in this case, in Betty Strong's death, should have looked for medical records to confirm the Parkinson's diagnosis or
Hmm.
figured out where she'd been diagnosed as opposed to just taking Clayton's word for it, and should have gone to the death scene, should have gone and looked at the RV where she died. Um, and neither of those things happened. But they did say that several of them said, we're not surprised. Like, this is something that happens in places where there isn't enough funding or enough support or enough resources for death investigators. Um, you see this kind of stuff happen. You see people having to make do with what they've got. One expert actually said, she said, if, and I'm quoting her, if you don't care enough about how death investigations are done in your jurisdiction to invest in the people doing it, you're going to get what you get.
Mm.
And that all of these people would really love to see some reforms, not just in Idaho. This is a national problem, but
Hmm.
Idaho's system definitely stands out for a lot of reasons.
So, Audrey, Cody Funk is still the Ada County coroner, and as I mentioned, you wrote that Funk said the story of Betty Strong's death needs to be told, even if it shows that he and Idaho County made mistakes. So, what is Funk hoping will come of this story?
Yeah, and Cody Funk, still the coroner of Idaho County. He he I asked him, what would have made a difference? And he says, like I think probably with what I knew at the time, I don't think that any amount of money or resources or proximity to an autopsy center would have changed what I did. What I would have needed is one, better training. Um,
Hmm.
Two, just more resources in general. Like he only fairly recently has been able to actually have deputies around the county. It's an enormous county for someone who works a
Hmm.
full-time job to have to drive to go look at a death scene for every death they're called out on. It is impractical. Um, so, resources, education. He also talked about having the ability to get a law enforcement officer to accompany him to a death scene. And that was just not something that happened here. And it's not something that is always guaranteed. So, there were some sort of specific things that he had to say, but overall, he and several other coroners have said we need reform. One of the biggest things that I hear and see consistently is we need more funding or we need more stable
Hmm.
funding, particularly in these very small counties.
So, Audrey, has Idaho even tried to fix the state system? Because this can't be something that our, state leaders aren't aware of.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely an effort to try and reform. So the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee, which is one of the committees in the legislature, asked the Office of Performance Evaluations to do a study. And this was a year and a half ago, I want to say it came out. But it basically summarized like here are our findings. Here are some really troubling things. And then they did a follow-up that looked at the resources that coroners have available to them. And we're gonna hopefully be reporting a little bit more on that. But the idea was to try and get some reforms in place.
Hmm.
The reforms that have come through so far are pretty minimal. And the governor did say in January, I asked him, would you support more resources to help coroners do their jobs? And he said yes. Um, but none of the legislation that passed in this last session had any resources.
Hmm.
So I think that I mean, I know that there's a subcommittee of people who are kind of looking at potential reforms. One of the things that has come up in the past when there's been any attempt to reform Idaho's coroner system is you run into people don't want to spend money on it, and the coroners are independent elected officials and it's a county by county thing. And so we'll see how this plays out over time to continue having a pure coroner system with no medical examiner, no oversight or anything like that, how that would work. I think we'll just have to wait and see over the next year or so.
So, Audrey, before I let you go, what's coming up next in your investigation?
Yeah. I what we're working on right now is a story about solutions that, actual coroners have proposed.
Hmm.
Like, you want to know how to reform Idaho's coroner system? Ask some coroners. Here's what they say.
Hmm.
Because they do, some of them do have opinions of what would work for their particular county or what they think would work for the state. And a lot of those reforms wouldn't would require more work from them. And so that's not necessarily something that every coroner in the state's going to want to do, especially if they don't get the resources to do that more work. But that's what we're looking at right now is kind of here's what coroners say they need.
Well, as always, Audrey, so appreciate all your investigative work on this and bringing this to the forefront. We've been speaking with Audrey Dutton. She's an investigative reporter with ProPublica, and she has been doing a deep dive into Idaho's troubled coroner system. We're going to put links to her news story and to her series on Idaho's troubled coroner system on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. Definitely worth a read. You've been listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. I'm Gemma Gaudette.